So let's talk about how we photograph these things. All right, first of all, in terms of terminology, let's make sure we're using the right term. We're going to be focusing primarily tonight on how to photograph impressions. So let's make sure we understand the difference between prints and impressions. Right? If I were to jump up on this table, right, stomp around, or even if I stomp around on the floor here, I would be leaving behind prints, right? Prints are two-dimensional. They have length, they have width. So if I were to jump on the table right here in front of Kalita and leave a shoe print on the table, it has length and it has width, but it doesn't have depth, meaning my foot didn't sink down in, right? Now on the other hand, if I were walking around in some loose sand, in like a wash, for example, dried up river wash, my foot would sink down into that sand. Or think about mud. If I were to step down in the mud, if I pull my foot away, because my shoe sank down in, when I pull my foot away, now what we have left behind is an impression. So impressions are three-dimensional. They have length, they have width, and they have depth. And they are the ones that are the more difficult to photograph. Prints are actually fairly easy to photograph. Impressions, on the other hand, are very difficult. If you've ever taken an art class before, how do you capture the three-dimensionality of something in a two-dimensional piece of artwork? A painting, a sketch, a drawing? Shadows. It's all about shadows. I remember learning that, and I took an art class in college called Studio Art for the Non-Art Major, because I can't draw for nothing.
That's cute.
Right? And so I remember one of the projects we had is we had to sketch a white egg sitting on a white piece of paper, right? Which was very difficult because you had to somehow try to capture the fact that this egg had three dimensions. The only way to do that is to make sure that you have a light source and you cast shadows and you use shading. The way that you create that three-dimensionality is by making sure you include shadows. So when we photograph an impression in dirt or sand, what do you think is very important in that photo? Shadows. And we use the flash to create those shadows, right? All right, so impressions have length, width, and depth. And it's important that we show that depth. And so lighting is a very important aspect to consider when we're photographing impressions. All right. Now here's something. When you photograph impressions, this is one of the few times that I would recommend that you don't take the photos using your digital camera. I would recommend that for certain things, it is still best to photograph them using film. Why? Why is film? Because these digital cameras are pretty amazing, right? But why would film be better than digital? The emulsion? No, it's not about the permanency of it. It's all about resolution. Remember, resolution is the ability to visually separate small details, right? Sometimes the details, when I compare a shoe print from the crime scene to a shoe print made by the suspect's shoe, sometimes the details I'm looking at are very small. And to be able to see those details, I need photos that have maximum resolution. Now, digital cameras have pretty good resolution, correct? Yes, they do. But your typical DSLR camera, the one that you and I might purchase and use, what is the resolution of those cameras? Well, again, we express resolution in digital cameras typically in terms of megapixels on the sensor, right? And pretty good DSLR cameras nowadays have about 15, 16 megapixels of resolution. If you were to use, now remember, film doesn't use megapixels, but if you were to use the same terminology, a piece of film, average 200 speed film, what do you think its resolution would be if we were using the same unit of measure, meaning megapixels of resolution? If the best digital cameras are about 15 to 16 megapixels, what do you think film is? It's about 25. 200 speed film is about 25 megapixels of resolution, equivalent to a digital camera with 25 megapixels of resolution. But keep in mind, we could also use slower film, which has higher resolution. So that if you start to use 100 speed film, now we're talking resolution around 30 or 40 megapixels, which is way better than you're going to get with the DSLR camera. So when you can, you don't always have this option, But when you can, you should actually photograph the following things with film, because it's not just shoe impressions. Fingerprints. When you can, you should photograph fingerprints with film. You should photograph footwear impressions with film. Tire track impressions with film. Tool marks. What's a tool mark? If someone tries to break in your house and they take a pry bar and they put it in your window and they start prying on the window, it's going to leave markings on. Those are called tool marks. If you photograph those, it's best to do it with film. Bite marks with film. Again, why? Film has higher resolution. And not only film, slow film. So low ISO. It's much better to use 100 ISO because remember, the lower the ISO, yes, it is less sensitive to light, meaning you're going to have to use longer shutter speeds, but it is much higher in resolution. So I'm going to use not only film, I'm going to use slower film, like 60 speed or 100 speed. And additionally, I'm going to choose to use black and white film. Black and white film has higher resolution than color film does. If I could get away with it, we don't really use these anymore. In the crime lab, we sometimes do. I would not even use 35mm film. I would use a large view camera, like this one, which uses film that's the same size. It's 4x5 film, 4" by 5". It's really big film. Because I'm going to be able to make an enlargement of that image, and it's going to maintain its resolution.
When you take out the film from that camera, does it have the same exposure rate, or like problems as like taking a film out of one of those cameras you bought as a kid?
So what you do with, there's a special back that you put on here that the film is contained in. So what you do is you pull the back that's on here now, which I would look through to focus. Then I would take this back off. I would have another back that's loaded with my film. I would slide that in, snap my photo, then take the back off, so that the film itself is not actually being exposed to light, except for the light coming through the lens. But although this would be the best for photographing footwear or tire track impressions, and yes, we do use it at this crime lab, am I going to use this at a crime scene? No, because it would take forever to take my photos, right? But it is technically the best if I were to use it. All right, so when possible, use film, use slow film, use black and white film. All right, tripod. Whenever we're photographing footwear and tire track impressions, when we take our close-up photos, we want to mount our camera on a tripod. So for our close-up photos, you want to mount the camera on a tripod. Now, I say close-up photos. Next week, we're going to talk about photographing crime scenes in general, like the rules for how do you photograph evidence. A footwear impression on the ground is a piece of evidence, and I'd like you to write this in your notes. This is very important. Any piece of evidence that you're taking photographs of must be photographed a minimum of 3 times. So any piece of evidence that you're going to photograph at a crime scene needs to be photographed 3 times. So I have this pen here, right? So let's say someone used this pen, they stabbed someone with it, right? So now we got blood on this pen, and let's say that during the course of searching the crime scene, we find that pen on the ground. We're going to collect that. That's a piece of evidence. Because that piece of evidence is there, we need to take at least 3 pictures of it. So once we've discovered it, once we've identified it, typically someone's going to put a marker down next to it so we know where it is. And then when we're ready to photograph, we're going to take 3 pictures. And what are those 3 pictures? 1, the first picture we take is going to be a long-range photo. Long-range photos are typically taken somewhere between 10 to 20 feet away from the piece of evidence. So you're going to back up 10 to 20 feet. Keep in mind these numbers are not hard and fast because it depends on the size of the object. If the object's really big, I might have to back up even farther. If I'm in a small room, like a walk-in closet, for example, I can't get 10 feet away. In that situation, I would simply zoom out with my lens. But I want to get far enough back. Because what is the purpose for this long-range photo? Why am I taking it from so far away?
So you can see there around.
Yeah, it's meant to show
Context.
context. Where is the item? Because keep in mind, sometimes where the item is can be just as important as what it is. Let me give you an example. Let's say we have a person who has a gunshot. We think it's self-inflicted. So let's say when we show up at the crime scene, we have a victim. Maybe their body's laying here on the ground, and maybe the gun's there in their hand. In most cases, when people shoot themselves, they're going to shoot themselves in the head. And what is more common than what you see on television, in television you see a person holding a gun up to the side of their head. That's actually not as common. What we see instead is a person holding a gun under their chin or in their mouth. Right, now I want you to think about a typical semi-automatic pistol, which is what a lot of people use to shoot themselves. For those of you who have ever fired a semi-automatic pistol, bang, 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 they eject the cartridge cases each time they're fired. And most guns eject the cartridge cases in which direction?
Right.
To the right. To the right, right? Most ejection ports on almost all guns eject to the right. So think about this. If I have a gun, and I'm going to shoot myself, and I put that gun under my chin, and I fire, if it's a semi-automatic pistol, it is going to eject the cartridge case. So, boom, I shoot myself, I collapse. Where should that cartridge case be?
Go to the right
It should be over there. That's a big deal.
Yeah.
If you show up at the crime scene, and that cartridge case is way over there, we have a problem. Right? Because that's not where it should be. It's not just always what it is. Sometimes it is where it is. Because if that cartridge case is way over there, it's probably because the shooter was not the dead body. It was probably a person standing way over here. They fired and the cartridge case ejected back over here. So if you are investigating that death, and that cartridge case is not where you expect it to be, as an investigator, you're going to begin to think, okay, this might not be self-inflicted. Does that make sense? So where it is sometimes just as important as what it is. So that's why that first photo, that long-range photo, it's meant to show location. Right? First photo, 10 to 20 feet away, long-range photo. Next photo, we're going to move a little closer. Now keep in mind, the reason that we put an evidence marker next to our item, like I've done here, is because from 10 or 20 feet away, if that object is really small, like a cartridge casing, it might be hard to see it from 20 feet away. But now we move up a little closer. Now we're going to take a mid-range photo. Mid-range photos are typically taken from about 5 to 10 feet away. Again, it depends on the size of the object. If it's a bigger object, we're going to have to back up, maybe more like 10 feet. If it's a smaller object like a pen, 5 feet away would be good. This photo is now meant to show what the object is, but yet still maintain that context of where it is. It's not meant to show details. It's just meant to kind of show what it is and where it is. Again, 5 to 10 feet away. Now I've taken my long-range photo first, my mid-range photo second, and by the way, in crime scene processing, that's how we do it. We always work from outside in, from far away to close up. So I've taken my long-range photo, now I've taken my mid-range photo, now I'm ready to take my close-ups. Close-up photos are typically taken somewhere between 2 to 5 feet away. If the object is on the ground, it should be taken straight down. If the object is on the wall, so if I had a blood stain on the wall right here, I would want to take the photo pointed straight at the wall. So we want, whenever we take those close-up photos, we want to be perpendicular to the object, at a 90-degree angle to. So think about a footwear impression. So let's remove our pen here. So let's say instead, what we had at a crime scene was a footwear impression. Now I'm not going to dump any dirt on the ground here. What I brought instead is this is a cast of a footwear impression. But let's just imagine that this is an impression in some mud, right? So if this is our impression in mud, all right, we found it during our search, and so someone put a marker down next to it so that we know where it is. Now we're ready to photograph it. We would start first doing what? Long range. Again, 10 to 20 feet away, right? then mid-range. Now we're ready to take our close-ups. And what are we going to use as we take our close-ups? Tripod. And the reason for that is, again, where do we want our camera located? Directly above. Using the tripod is going to allow us to do that. So I'm going to take my tripod, and I'm going to set my tripod up directly above the impression. Now I really like these particular tripods because the stem, which is this middle portion of the tripod, right now it is situated vertically, but I can actually flip this stem so that now it's in this horizontal position, which is then going to allow me to mount my camera on the end so that it's pointed straight down. So I'm going to go ahead and take the plate off the top of my tripod. I can attach it to the bottom of my camera. By the way, when you put these plates on the bottom of the camera, finger tight, right? Don't crank it down so much. Like, you know when the people put they fix your tires and they put your tires on, they put the lug nuts on too tight and you can't get them off later? Same thing, finger tight. All right, now what I'm going to be able to do, now, a couple hints. Right, when I go to snap this on, if I don't pay attention to the strap of the camera, it can dangle down in front of the lens. Right. So what I want to do instead is I take the strap and I put it along the back of the stem, and now it's out of my way, right? So now I have my camera located this way. Now, a couple things. I can, if I want to, move the camera in close, near the legs of the tripod, or I can extend it out farther away, right? Keep in mind, the farther the camera is away from the legs of the tripod, you move the center of gravity away from the tripod, which also means if you're not careful, you can tip it over. So I would recommend, instead, pulling the camera in closer to the legs of the tripod, like I've done here. And if you need to, you can actually open up the legs of the tripod wider, all right? It's always better to have the camera closer to the middle of the center of gravity so that it doesn't fall over. Right? But right now, I have my camera now mounted so that it's pointing straight down. It is perpendicular to my impression. Perpendicular means at a 90-degree angle, right? It is straight down. There's an important reason for that. When you are closer to something, it looks bigger. As something is farther away from you, in terms of perspective, it looks smaller. For example, have you ever seen those trick photos that people take at the Tower of Pisa in Italy? Where they take a photo where they try to pretend like they're holding up the tower, right?
Yeah.
And the reason that they're able to do that is the person is closer to the lens than the tower is in the background. And because of perspective, it makes it look like the person is big enough to hold up the tower. So remember, the closer you are to the lens, the bigger you are. So let's think about that for a moment. The mistake I see made by some people who photograph footwear impressions is, when they take a photo of the impression, they don't have the camera mounted directly above. So instead, let's imagine that we had a footwear impression on the ground here, and instead of having the camera directly above, I'm taking the photo at an angle less than 90 degrees. Now, one side of the impression is actually closer to the lens than the other side is, which is going to make, in the photo, it's going to make the impression elongate. Exactly right. It's going to make a size 9 shoe look like a size 11 shoe. To not do that, to make sure we don't do that, that's why it's important that we mount the camera directly above the impression at a 90-degree angle to that impression. Right? Now, in terms of distance, anywhere from about 2 to 5 feet is going to be okay. Because the impression is, for the most part, flat, it's not entirely two-dimensional, but we don't have this really deep depth of field that we need. We're also not worried about distorting the image by zooming in or zooming out. So if necessary, if you need to, you can zoom the lens in, right? So it's okay to have your camera mounted 2 or 3 feet up above and then zoom in. Rather than dropping the camera way down low, where it then becomes difficult to look through the camera in order to focus it. All right, you with me so far? So tripod, very important.